More than 620,000 Americans dead. But this time, they weren't fighting some foreign enemy. They were fighting each other, brother killing brother, fathers standing across the battlefield from their own sons. This was the bloodiest chapter in American history, the American Civil War. Around the early 1800s, America looked like one country from the outside. One flag, one constitution, one people. But on the inside, two completely different worlds were forming. Slowly, quietly. The northern states, places like New York, Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, they were building factories, laying down railroad tracks. Cities were growing fast. Immigrants from Europe were pouring in, looking for work. The northern economy was built on industry, manufacturing, and commerce. And then there was the South. Virginia, South Carolina, Georgia, Mississippi. These states had massive cotton plantations. And then there was the South. Virginia, South Carolina, Georgia, Mississippi. These states had massive cotton plantations, and those plantations were run by enslaved people, human beings kidnapped from Africa and forced into a lifetime of unpaid labor. The numbers are staggering. By 1860, roughly 4 million people were held as slaves across the southern states. They were human beings, but in the eyes of the law, they were treated as property, bought and sold, families torn apart, beaten, dehumanized. In the North, a growing movement of people called abolitionists began speaking out. They said this was wrong, this was evil, this had to stop. In 1852, Harriet Beecher Stowe published Uncle Tom's Cabin, and it shook the conscience of the North. For the first time, many people in the North truly understood the horror of what slavery looked like up close. But the South pushed back hard. Their leaders argued that every state had the right to make its own decisions. The federal government had no business telling them what to do. They called it states' rights. So what was the real fight about? Slavery or states' rights? Honestly, both. But if you look closely, the right the South was fighting hardest to protect was the right to own slaves. The two issues were so tangled together that separating them is almost impossible. November 1860, the presidential election. And the winner was Abraham Lincoln, the Republican candidate. Now here's the thing. Lincoln hadn't actually promised to abolish slavery everywhere. He said he wanted to stop slavery from spreading into new territories being added to the country. That was it. Southern leaders saw Lincoln's election as an existential threat. They thought, if this man takes office, our entire way of life is over. Our economy will collapse. And so, before Lincoln even took the oath of office, yes, before he was officially president, Southern states started leaving the Union. South Carolina went first, December 20th, 1860. Then Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, Texas. These 7 states came together in February 1861 and formed a brand new country, the Confederate States of America. They elected Jefferson Davis as their president. Their capital was first set up in Montgomery, Alabama, and later moved to Richmond, Virginia. Lincoln was crystal clear in his response. He said, "The Union cannot be broken. No state has the constitutional right to unilaterally leave." Both sides stared each other down. All it would take was a single spark. That spark came on April 12, 1861. Confederate cannons opened fire. The bombardment lasted 34 hours straight. Eventually, the Union garrison surrendered. Remarkably, no one was killed during the battle itself. But this event pushed both sides past the point of no return. Lincoln immediately called for 75,000 volunteer soldiers. And that call to arms triggered 4 more states to join the Confederacy: Virginia, Arkansas, Tennessee, and North Carolina. Now 11 states stood against the Union. The Civil War had officially begun. Before we dive deeper into the battles, let's pause for a moment and understand what each side was working with. The Union, the North. Population of about 22 million. Massive industrial capacity. They could manufacture weapons, ammunition, uniforms, and supplies at scale. An extensive railroad network to move troops and materials. A powerful navy that could blockade southern ports. The South had 9 million people, and roughly 3.5 to 4 million of those were enslaved people. Far fewer factories, limited railroad infrastructure. First, they were fighting on home turf. They knew the land. Second, their military leadership was exceptional. Robert E. Lee, widely considered one of the most brilliant generals of his era, fought for the Confederacy. The Confederacy's strategy was straightforward. They didn't need to conquer the North. They just needed to survive long enough for Northern citizens to grow tired of the war and say, "Let them go." They were fighting a defensive war. The Union, on the other hand, had to win outright. They had to defeat Confederate armies, occupy Southern territory, and force the rebellious states back into the Union. A much harder task. July 1861. The first major battle, the First Battle of Bull Run. Fought near Manassas, Virginia, not far from Washington, D.C., some Northern civilians actually packed picnic baskets and rode out to watch the battle. They expected a quick Union victory, maybe even entertainment. What they witnessed instead was a disaster. Union forces were routed. Soldiers fled back toward Washington in a panicked retreat. That day made one thing painfully clear. This war was not going to be short. In April, the Battle of Shiloh erupted in Tennessee. In just 2 days, there were roughly 23,000 casualties, killed, wounded, and missing, from both sides combined. America had never seen anything like it in such a short span. Then came September 1862, the Battle of Antietam in Maryland. This is remembered as the single bloodiest day in American history. Then came September 1862, the Battle of Antietam in Maryland. This is remembered as the single bloodiest day in American history. In one day, one single day, approximately 22,000 soldiers were killed or wounded. General Lee had marched his army north, hoping that a major victory on Union soil might convince European powers, especially Britain and France, to recognize the Confederacy. But at Antietam, Union General George McClellan managed to stop Lee's advance. January 1st, 1863, Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation. It declared that all enslaved people in Confederate-held territory were now free. Now, let's be clear about something. This proclamation did not free enslaved people in the border states, slave-holding states that had stayed loyal to the Union, like Kentucky and Missouri. So it wasn't a blanket abolition of slavery everywhere, but even so, it was a seismic shift. Here's why. First, it transformed the nature of the war. From this point forward, this wasn't just a war to preserve the Union, it was a war for human freedom. That changed everything. Morally, politically, and emotionally. Second, it opened the door for African Americans to serve, and serve they did. Approximately 180,000 black soldiers enlisted in the Union Army. Another 18,000 served in the Navy. They fought with extraordinary courage. The 54th Massachusetts Infantry, an all-black regiment, became legendary for their heroic assault on Fort Wagner in South Carolina. Third, the proclamation made it politically impossible for European nations to support the Confederacy. No country in Europe was going to publicly ally itself with a government fighting to preserve slavery. Not in the 1860s. July 1863, a small town in Pennsylvania, Gettysburg. General Lee pushed north again. This time, he was looking for a decisive, war-ending victory. A win so overwhelming that it would force the Union to negotiate peace. But at Gettysburg, the Union Army, commanded by General George Meade, stood firm. The battle raged for 3 days, July 1st through July 3rd, 1863. On the third day, Lee made a decision that many historians consider his greatest mistake. He ordered what's now known as Pickett's Charge, roughly 12,500 Confederate soldiers marching across open ground, directly into the teeth of Union artillery and rifle fire. It was a slaughter. Lee was defeated. He retreated south, his army shattered. Total casualties at Gettysburg from both sides, somewhere between 46,000 and 51,000 men. At almost the same time, out west, General Ulysses S. Grant captured Vicksburg, Mississippi, a critical Confederate stronghold on the Mississippi River. With Vicksburg gone, the Union now controlled the entire Mississippi, effectively splitting the Confederacy in half. After July 1863, the momentum of the war shifted decisively and permanently in the Union's favor. 1864, Lincoln promoted Grant to commanding general of all Union armies. Grant was a different kind of general. He didn't retreat. He understood a fundamental truth. The Union had more men, more resources, more of everything. His strategy was relentless pressure. Grind the Confederacy down. Exhaust them. In Virginia, the overland campaign began. The Wilderness, Spotsylvania, Cold Harbor. One brutal battle after another. Thousands dying in each engagement. But Grant didn't stop. He pushed Lee back to Petersburg, Virginia, and laid siege. That siege lasted nearly 9 months. Meanwhile, in the West, General William Tecumseh Sherman captured Atlanta in September 1864. This was critical for Lincoln politically. The 1864 presidential election was coming up, and war weariness was growing in the North. the Democratic candidate, George McClellan, was running on a platform of negotiating peace with the Confederacy. But the fall of Atlanta reinvigorated Northern morale. Lincoln won re-election decisively. The fall of Atlanta reinvigorated Northern morale. Lincoln won re-election decisively. After Atlanta, Sherman launched his infamous March to the Sea. He marched his army roughly 300 miles from Atlanta to Savannah, Georgia, and destroyed nearly everything in his path. Railroads, factories, farms, warehouses, infrastructure, all of it. This was total war. The goal wasn't just to defeat Confederate armies on the battlefield. It was to destroy the South's ability to wage war at all. April 1865. The walls were closing in on the Confederacy from every direction. Grant was pursuing Lee relentlessly through Virginia. Lee's soldiers were starving, exhausted, and deserting in growing numbers. On April 2nd, Richmond fell, the Confederate capital. April 9th, 1865. Appomattox Court House, Virginia. General Robert E. Lee surrendered to General Ulysses S. Grant. Grant offered remarkably generous terms. Confederate soldiers would not be imprisoned. They could go home. Officers could keep their sidearms. Soldiers who owned horses could keep them. They'd need them for spring planting, Grant said. He told his troops not to celebrate. "The war is over," he said. "The rebels are our countrymen again." 4 years. More than 620,000 dead. Some modern estimates place the figure as high as 750,000. More Americans died in the Civil War than in World War I, World War II, Korea, and Vietnam combined. Lincoln saw the end of the war, but he never got to see the peace he fought for. On April 14, 1865, just 5 days after Lee's surrender, John Wilkes Booth shot Lincoln at Ford's Theater in Washington. Lincoln died the next morning. In December 1865, the 13th Amendment to the Constitution was ratified, abolishing slavery permanently and completely across the entire United States. The 14th Amendment followed, guaranteeing equal protection under the law. The 15th Amendment granted voting rights regardless of race. But did equality arrive that day? No, not even close. The era of Reconstruction came and went. Jim Crow laws were enacted across the South. Racial segregation and discrimination persisted for another 100 years. The Civil War ended slavery, but it did not end injustice. That fight was far, far longer. The American Civil War, it's not just a story about battles and generals. It's a story about the soul of a nation. When a country goes to war with itself, the wounds aren't just on the body, they're on the spirit. This war forced America to answer a question it had been avoiding since its founding. Are all men truly created equal? The Declaration of Independence said yes. The Constitution said yes. But reality said something very different. The Civil War was a bloody, agonizing step toward making that promise real. If this video meant something to you, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments, what do you think was the most important lesson of the Civil War? I'll see you in the next one.